Welcome to the Princeton Flying School Podcast with Pete Rafle, Princeton Flying School Instructor Emeritus. In this episode, Pete sat down with Jon Nierenberg to talk about his life in the Alaskan wilderness as owner and operator of Earthsong Lodge, as well as Denali Dog Sled Expeditions. And of course, they talked about the challenges and opportunities of Alaskan aviation.
This morning we're welcoming Jon Nierenberg, who's a member, of course, of Princeton's own Nierenberg family, and he operates the Earthsong Lodge and dog sledding operation in Alaska. And it's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for taking time out of your visit to the family.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
So what I'd like to know is just how did you end up living in Alaska?
How did I end up living
And how long have you
clan?
been up there?
Well, I moved up to Alaska in 1982. Right after college, I graduated from Syracuse in winter '79. And right after that, I got my first summer seasonal job in the National Park Service as a ranger. I had done volunteer work with them out west near the Grand Canyon. And so in the summers of 80, 81, and the winters in between, I worked in the Southwest as a seasonal park ranger. I took a law enforcement training course for rangers over in the Smokies one fall, and I met some people from Denali, and they were talking up how great Alaska was, and I should come up and work as a ranger at Denali National Park. So I came up there. I was a road patrol law enforcement ranger in 1982. Really loved the park. I wasn't planning on necessarily staying up there, but that summer I got to meet sled dogs. And that winter I decided to stay around and volunteer with the Denali Park sled dog kennels. It's the only park that uses sled dogs for winter patrols in the heart of the park, which is wilderness. They've been doing that since about the time the park was established in the early 1900s. And I equate it a lot with my family. Probably the first time my brother got in the left seat of an airplane and felt that it sort of was just the right thing for him to do. For me, it was getting on the back of a dog sled. Well, that changed everything. I ended up staying there from then on. I homesteaded some land so I can have my own sled dogs. I'd work in the park in the summertime as a seasonal ranger. And in the wintertime, I would use my dogs not just to haul firewood to where I lived. It was a few miles off the road, but also just do these long dog sled trips exploring. And I got into guiding in mid-'80s to part-time dog sled guiding to try to pay for the dog food for the sled dogs. That's it. Those sled dogs is what kept me up there.
So does Earthsong operate year-round, or is it...
Well, the lodge, the lodge was built in '96 and opened in '97. It's near the spot where my homestead was, but along the road corridor because my homestead's off the road. And we've got 14 cabins now. We started with 10, and we're open in the summer season for the summer tourist season for Denali National Park, summer visitors to the park. Most people staying between 2 and 4 nights. That's our summer operation, and then our winter operation is a vast expanse on that initial guiding I started doing in '85. Mm-hmm. I continued to do that more as the '80s and got into the '90s while I was still working in the park as a ranger in the summer. But once we built the lodge, we had a base of operations and was able to make it the business it is today. So the lodge is, our business is basically 2 seasons. It's the summer tourist cabin season for the average park visitor, and the wintertime is guided dog sled tours.
What kind of people come up for the dog sled tour? I guess you get quite a wide variety of people.
Everyone, honestly, everyone. And it has changed a little over the years with things like the Iditarod sled dog race becoming more of a national and international event instead of just something that happened, that people in Alaska knew about. And movies coming out, movies like, Snow Dogs and 8 Below and things like that, more and more people started learning a little bit more about dog sledding. So for people who do the dog sledding, we take families with young kids out. Once they're 11 or 12 years old, they can usually drive their own team. And so we do interactive dog sledding, not just little rides where we train them and they drive their own dogs. The oldest we've taken out driving their own team is 82 years old on a 3-day overnight trip. And we try, it's a variety of ages, all walks of life, and physical abilities too. We've even taken people with serious physical limitations, mobility issues out, just trying to offer something for everyone.
So what are some of the really challenging trips on a dog sled? Can you go out for a week, or do you have the support that can handle that?
Yeah, well, we do dog trips anywhere from 1 to 4 hour day trips to 3 to 10 day overnight trips, and the focus has always been more on the overnight. And it just varies. The first day of each of the overnights is a training day where guests are taught how to deal with the dog, so they can drive their own 5 or 6 dog team to make it a little bit more interactive. And all the trips have certain physical aspects that make them a little bit challenging. And then as the years go on, some years are better snow conditions than others. With the advent of the changing climate up there, it's making things a little bit more erratic with how good the conditions are. They can be great one day and terrible 2 days later, with freezing rain in the middle of the wintertime. Things like that happen. But once we start getting to the 7 to 10 day trips, those are more major expeditions, a lot more physical work. We can still get people who've never dog sled before do those. And I remember years ago, I took a fellow from Australia out who had never seen snow and came up and did a 7-day trip. That was the first time he saw snow, and he did great. We just do a lot of screening in the beginning to try to make sure that we set up the right trip for the right people. And there's small groups between 2 and 4 people usually.
I noticed that in the paper when the Iditarod started, or they were talking about there was no snow in Anchorage, so they had to put down. I guess they made snow to get the. Is that becoming? This isn't a political podcast, but I'm very concerned about global warming, and I'm concerned about how it's affecting the Alaska interior.
Yeah, to try to stay as little towards the politics as possible. I mean, it's pretty well known that Alaska tends to be more of a red conservative state. It's a resource extraction state. 85% or more of our state revenues come from oil, so that's just the nature. But that said, you find few people in Alaska that won't admit that the climate's changing pretty fast up there. They'll give you various reasons all over the political spectrum, but it is definitely changing. From the Bering Sea ice not freezing up, it's causing coastal erosion in the wintertime with the storms, to rains in the wintertime, and early weird snows in the summer, receding glaciers at a phenomenal rate. There's just a lot of stuff going on. It impacts us because we're losing part of our season. When I first started guiding in the mid-'80s, I could make it out to our first cabin. We have a cabin that we use 28 miles west of our lodge. I could be out there by Thanksgiving. There's one large river to cross, and you have to wait for that to freeze up, and there'd be enough snow. Now, with what's been happening these recent years, I don't book those overnight trips till New Year's. So I've lost over a month, 5 weeks or so of the guiding season on the front end. It'll be cold enough, but not super cold enough to freeze that river, and we might not get snow for a month and a half in the early winter. On the other end, I used to guide in the park through the 3rd week of April. This year, that river that we have the problem with opened up around March 22nd, and that ended all the trips basically out of that side of the lodge, which is where most of the trips go. So, I mean, we're just losing business. And then one other thing, we do some air support for some of our trips. Machines are not allowed to be used inside the wilderness, but airplanes can fly into certain spots to exchange guests on some of our longer trips. And we had a ski trip a few years ago that had the people were sitting there for 5 days because of all these erratic storms that kept happening. And that's all a function of the jet stream and El Niños, which are becoming more erratic and more El Niños every year. And that's messing up our winters, just big swings, temperatures and weather patterns and such, instead of something that you can sort of rely on. I mean, you never rely on the weather in Alaska. I remember one of my bosses years ago telling me that if you need to get to some place in Alaska fast, you don't fly, because you can't always rely on the weather. You just go on the ground because you can always make it there. It just seems to take longer, but that's sort of a running joke, but in a lot of ways it's true.
Do you have an airstrip at your location, or?
We do not. We're about 7 miles from the closest airstrip, the Healy Strip, and it's actually a good paved runway. I don't remember the length, but it doesn't have any facilities. Just tie down space.
So you'll take people out on a one-way out into the wilderness and have them picked up at that end and bring them home,
right?
Or bring them back to Healy, probably,
right?
And then, so what kind of airplanes would you use in that or contract for?
When we first started doing some of this air support trips in the 80s and 90s, we used a variety of flying services, some out of Fairbanks, which is northeast of us, some out of Talkeetna, which is southwest of us. The ones out of Talkeetna are actually a little closer, but they have to fly over the Alaska Range. And you have to fly over Brooks Gap, which is above 10,000 feet. So you need at least above a 10,000 foot ceiling there, well above it, if you're flying, because it's right next to Denali, which is 20,000. And they would fly in with a variety of planes. I've seen 206s with skis. The one out of Fairbanks uses a Helio Courier. We only use the company out of Fairbanks now because they don't have to cross the range, so it's more reliable. We don't have to wait on certain weather conditions. They can usually sneak in there a little easier. But that Helio Courier on skis, we've been dealing with these guys for years, and I've seen them and flown in them since the early 80s. To me, that's about one of the most amazing planes I've ever flown in. It truly is.
Yeah, they don't need much runway to.
In some ways, they almost don't need any runway. I've seen them take off in as little space as like a Super Cub. Just if you get a little bit of headwind and the pilot knows what he's doing. I've seen them off the ground. I've never seen flying. Especially the pilot knows how to fly them. I mean, they're definitely a specialized plane.
Your lodge is off of a main road, right?
That's correct.
It's not on the road. It's quite a drive in.
It's on a paved road 4 miles from the main highway.
Talkeetna, does it have roads?
Yes, Talkeetna is off the highway.
But there are villages west of there that there are no roads. So.
Right. Oh, there's a pile of villages all throughout Alaska, especially southwest, west, northwest, and north of us, all scattered about. Yeah, that they totally rely on air travel.
Yeah. So I'm imagining myself on one of your dog sleds, and you've taught me how to successfully steer this mob of dogs to go where I want them to go. Because dogs usually take you where you don't want to go.
They go basically where they want to go, which is following the guide in front. That makes it easy.
Wildlife in the area, things that I'm going to love seeing, and maybe some animals that I'm not going to enjoy having close to me. What are some of the... Wildlife
is hit or miss. I mean, we do have quite a bit of wildlife near us. You see more wildlife in the summertime in Denali. We've had some trips where we see a lot, and some of them that we see very little. About the only animal we really worry about running into is moose. Sled dogs, like a lot of dogs, they'll chase anything that moves. The bigger the animal, the more excited they get. And there's sort of this pack mentality with these dogs. The only real predator for these large animals like moose and caribou and such is wolves, and we do have a healthy wolf population near us. So I think they equate our dogs with wolves, and so they tend to move off. Caribou, doll sheep, and all those animals will run away. Moose may run away or may charge you or may do both. They're pretty erratic. I'm one of the few people around our area that has sled dogs, that has any dogs, that up until about a year ago, never had one of my dogs killed by a moose attack. They'll come into the middle of the dog team and stomp up dogs and such, and I've had them do that, but never had a fatality. I did have a pet dog killed by a moose last winter that they just let the dog out the cabin, and the moose was right there and just took umbrage to the dog. And it doesn't happen too often, but that's about the only other animal. All the rest of them run away. In the wintertime, we mush west out of our lodge into these additions to the park that were added in 1980. That's where the Denali caribou herd is. And the herd is generally a good couple hundred of them out there at a time. It's not a very big herd, but we've run our dogs right into the middle of the caribou herd. They always run away, but it makes it pretty exciting.
But the moose take a stand.
Well, they do. They can take a stand, or they can run away, or they can just ignore you. They're if anyone can figure what's going on inside their head, you look at the animal and see where their ears are. If their ears are laid flat back, that's a big danger thing, and that means that they're going to probably come charging at you. But if they're just sort of ignoring you, or the ears are straight up, then you're usually fine. But you still, no matter what, don't want to get too close to them. There's been more fatalities from moose attacks in Alaska than bears.
Yeah, that I was just about to ask you. One animal you haven't mentioned is bear.
And they're generally sleeping in the wintertime, which is nice.
Okay. Except the big one that's in the hotel down there in Anchorage.
Yeah, I don't bring my dogs in there very often, so that's okay. Well, bears aren't true hibernators, so they can wake up. And there were some instances of them waking up different parts of the state this winter. We had just about one of the warmest winters on record. And they'll wake up for a couple days sometimes if there's a big warm spell. And they're pretty lethargic. They sort of act like they're almost drugged up. They wander around a little bit, then go back into their den. So I've seen fresh bear tracks in January, but they're generally not a problem.
Yeah, the dog team experience sounds wonderful. That's something even as I enter my dotage, I should think about doing once before I.
Yeah, it's a once in a lifetime type. Well, it could be more than once in a lifetime, but it's unique. There's nothing quite like it, and it's on a lot of people's bucket lists.
How many dogs do you have?
Well, right now we don't have nearly as many as we've had in the past because the nature of our business has changed with who's guiding. I have about 15 dogs right now. I used to keep somewhere between 22 and 25 dogs, which was enough for me to guide with one team and have two guests with teams following me. If I had a third or fourth guest, I just would borrow dogs from other people in the neighborhood. There's 7 or 8 other sled dog kennels, other people within a mile radius of where we live. I used to guide all the trips myself. And then as we got into, well into the 90s, I started hiring a friend here and there to help do a couple trips, either go with me with a larger group or do their own. Now I don't guide any trips myself. I just manage the business, so I don't need a lot of my own dogs. Most of my dogs are pretty old, and I had 6 people guiding for me this winter. Some using my dogs, a mixture of my dogs and theirs, and then everyone else had their own dogs, which is a nice way to do it instead of having 100 dogs in your yard and just hiring guides. It makes it a lot quieter at the lodge. Yeah.
The summertime visitors have a completely different experience, I would imagine.
Right.
What if I came up for 4 days or 5 days or more? What kind of itinerary or activities should I expect to be able to do?
Well, if you come up to Denali, you should be staying probably no less than 3 nights. You give you 2 full days of doing stuff in the park. There's only one road that goes into Denali. It's a 95-mile long road that's paved the first 15 miles, and that's the only part that's open to private traffic. After that, it's restricted to bus traffic only. a mass transit system to basically find a way to control impact, to keep having these 50, 60 car bear jams on the road. And the road is quite dangerous in spots. There's some vertical cliffs that are quite impressive. So there's these buses that go in. There's one that's geared around the cruise ship tour groups that stay at the big hotels, and there's ones that's more for the average park visitor, people that stay with us. And that system allows people to get on and off. So you get on the bus, go out a certain distance. If you want to get off and hike for a couple hours, you can do that and jump onto another bus. The bus trip in the park takes all day. Most people spend between 8 and 12 hours doing that. And since it doesn't get dark in the summer, you have a lot of daylight. That's one day, and that's the best way to see wildlife and the best way to get close views of Denali, those big, beautiful photos that you see in the National Geographic and such. The second day, most people will do a variety of activities within the first 15 miles of the road, from day hikes to ranger programs, whitewater rafting, flight seeing. Flight seeing is fantastic. It's very expensive in Alaska, but if anyone's coming up to the state and is going to go flight seeing anywhere, you should do it around Denali. And they offer trips around the mountain, a couple operators, and they offer some that you land with a ski plane on a large glacier, a mile-wide long glacier. And it's pretty impressive. So there's lots of stuff to do. We have people that ask me, how long should they stay? And I say, however many days you want, we'll help you plan all the activities you want to do. But most people stay between 2 and 4 nights with us. Most people come to the state for week and a half, and they spend about a third up around Denali in interior Alaska and about 2/3 from Anchorage and south to the Kenai Peninsula to get the maritime, tidewater, glacier, marine wildlife type stuff.
Yeah, everybody's got to try to get their halibut out of Homer, I guess.
Right. Yeah. If you want to do fishing, you need the time.
Are they like dragging a giant weight up from somewhere? Yeah. Fishing near you. You said you had a river.
Well, there's a lot of rivers, and we've got a lake that's 4 miles from us, 8 Mile Lake. You have to hike into it a little bit, but it's a large lake. Fishing is pretty lousy. I'll tell everyone that if they're coming to Alaska on a vacation and they want to do fishing, try to do it anywhere else but near us. We're so close to the mountains, and it's glacial water. There's not good fishing around there. People who fly fish, we can point them towards where there's some grayling, but most people want to do things like salmon fishing or trout or halibut and stuff on the oceans. There's much better places. You basically want to go south of us.
Yeah. Of course, I'm asking that question because I'm interested in the fishing part. I've fished out of Homer, and I've fished out of Kenai and Sterling and that area. So can we get back to just the airplanes again?
Sure.
I'm just curious. We see a lot of these YouTube flashes of people landing on sandbars and that kind of thing. What do you know about that? Who does that kind of stuff, and how does a guy get to do that kind of
everyone, thing? I think we have the highest per capita of pilots in the country, in Alaska. And I've known a lot of pilots that have Cubs and such that, the farther you're away from the city, the less you worry about the FAA looking over your logbooks. They work on their own planes. They do their own stuff. It's maybe a few decades behind what's going on in the more normal part of the country. But I've had friends that had Cubs, Super Cubs, Taylorcrafts. I've got a friend that has a 175. And most of they just use it for fun. I also know a few people that do stuff commercially too. It's just a great way of seeing. So much of the state is truly inaccessible unless you travel by air, unless you have a couple months to take a boat down through the rivers and up. It doesn't make any sense. But I've been fortunate enough to fly in a big variety of planes out there. And I've done the sandbar landing, a lot of float plane stuff. Back when I worked at another national park in '87 at Lake Clark, it's remote, no roads. Everything is done by air. So everything was done either with a 185 on floats, a Super Cub with Tundra tires, the big balloon tires, or a Beaver with amphibious floats.
Oh.
And I was my boss down there, the chief ranger, when I was a backcountry ranger who flew me everywhere, let me do all the right seat flying for that, because I had no experience flying floats or anything around here, around New Jersey, or flying mountain flying. And this guy acted like my instructor for the whole summer, from anywhere from flying the Beaver into Anchorage, which was international, which is one of the busiest airports in the country, that whole area, to landing a Super Cub on Tundra tires out on a gravel bar. I mean, that's real flying. That's great stuff.
Yeah, a real destination for all those of you who are listening today should be to go to the Anchorage airport and walk around Lake Hood and just see all those seaplanes. Well, I've never seen so many airplanes on floats in one spot in the world, except for Lake Hood.
And then go across town to Merrill Field.
Ah, yes.
So when one of the years my parents came up, when my father was up, we went all around Merrill Field and Lake Hood. And he actually went to the aviation museum, and my father found that they had mislabeled something. I can't remember which display it was. He pointed it out to them. Impressed my best friend is the chief mechanic for a fellow who has one of the largest caravan fleets in the world, and he leases a lot of them up there. And he was with my friend, who was very impressed. My father knew his airplanes.
Those of us who knew your father well are not surprised that he would find error in somebody else.
Exactly.
Doing things. I have very fond memories of your father. He was a great help to me, and over the last 30 years or so that I've been here. But, well, I think that I've learned a lot about your operation today, and I think I'm going to try to see if I can get in there. How many people do you sleep in the? Can you accommodate it during the summertime?
In the summertime, so we have 14 cabins, 5 different sizes. We usually have 30, somewhere between 32 and 42 people a night. Most nights we're full, but not all. It's anywhere from 1 room, 1 bed cabins to these 3 room, 2 bedroom cabins that take larger groups and such. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, for taking time out from your visit with the family and telling us more about Alaska and your very unique experience up there. I really appreciate it. And thank all of you who are listening to this podcast, and I welcome you to come on back and stay with us. As the months go by, we'll tell you a lot of more interesting stories. Thank you. Thank you, Jon.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Princeton Flying School Podcast with Pete Rafle. Our podcasts are recorded at the Princeton Airport and are produced by HG Media. If you enjoyed our show, please share it with your friends. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts.